My name is Osler Peterson. Everybody in the world knows me as Pete because I had the ironic situation of being the second Osler Peterson in the same household. And so that my dad was Osler and I became Pete. And I'm chair of the Medfield Board of Selectmen at the moment. I've been a selectman for 12 years in Medfield. And I'm up for re-election in a contested election. The election is going to be on Monday, March 26th. Well, the selectman's position on that has been that we want the hospital cleaned up as much as possible, and the state has actually done a very good job of cleaning up a lot of it already. The dump out behind the maintenance buildings has been cleaned up very nicely. The clay containment area has been cleaned up very nicely. Where we have parted company with them is over the C&D area, it's an area right next to the Charles River. It's in the wetlands of the Charles River, and for decades the hospital was using it as a dump, and they were using it as a dump for the power plant. Is right there on the banks of the river, and it was originally a coal-fired power plant, and there's just tons of coal ash in that area. It's in fact it's about a 3.2 acre area that is covered with this dump, and it's up to 12 feet thick in places. Our position as the Board of Selectmen is that the proper cleanup is to take that material out where it's below the groundwater table. And so obviously to get down to that level, you're taking everything out on top of it as well. But we don't want that material under the water table. It's in an aquifer. It's in a potentially productive aquifer, so that if we needed another well, that would be an area that we would perhaps have a well, and as long as that material is there, my understanding is that we would have a lot of trouble putting a well in that area. So we have 3 LSPs, licensed site professionals, who are the environmental cleanup specialists who are advising the town on this. John Thompson, Ralph Tella, and then we've hired Andrea Stiller. And all 3 of them have told us that the appropriate cleanup is to take this material out, down below groundwater. And we're willing to have it stored on site somewhere, just out of the groundwater. And apparently that sort of storage on site was done at Boston State Hospital with materials, and so that we think that it could be done there. There's Spectra has a high-pressure gas pipeline through there, which complicates the cleanup. Our position has mainly been to take the material out up to the gas pipeline, edge of the gas pipeline. We haven't been asking them to move the gas pipeline. So that's in terms of the cleanup. That's where we have split with DCAM and the state over the cleanup. We met with the commissioner. I met with the commissioner a week ago Friday, and with Mike Sullivan and Christine Terweiler, and she wanted to give us the advance word as to what they were going to be reporting on this Thursday, on the 22nd, to us, and that is that they're going to go forward with the capping that we've been opposing. They did change the way that they're dealing with the bank. They're doing more of a bioengineered bank, which is one of the big things that the Charles River watershed was asking for. We were asking for it as well. But in terms of the big thing, the cost apparently of our cleanup, they say, is substantially more than capping in place. The other big news that we got from Commissioner Cornelissen when we met with her a week ago Friday was that she said that she is actually willing to sell the Medfield State Hospital to the town, and the details of how that would be worked out are to be forthcoming. She said a couple things about it, although that when they've done it in the past, and this was new ground, because in the past Commissioner Perini had refused the town's request to buy the hospital site. And what she said that they've done with towns in the past is they've structured the payment over time, with part of the payment coming when the land is developed, to make it more affordable for the towns. She also said that they would like to recoup some of their costs. They've had costs of, I think it's around $250,000 a year for the security, and obviously they've spent millions on the cleanup. And we didn't get into the details of which costs they'd like to be recovering. So that's the big news on the hospital, that the town has the option to buy it. The hospital was the way in which the Board of Selectmen, in an official capacity, was looking to deal with the 40B issue. The state hospital had, into the 440 units that we had negotiated with the state, 256 of those were affordable units that we would get credit for, despite the fact that only 79 of them were actually going to be affordable units. Because when you have the rental units, you get credit for 100% instead of just the actual affordable units, so that we were using a multiplier effect to have much more credit than we had affordable units, really. The reality was that the hospital never got done, never got close enough to being done to be able to provide the town the protection. You have to actually pull the building permit or have an affordable housing production plan in place. And I think that what I remember from the discussions that we were having at the time with Professor Bobrowski was that you have to pull the permit to start the process within a year. You actually have to start producing the housing to have the protection of the affordable housing production plan. And we never got anywhere close to that because the hospital never went out to bid to developers, and so that never happened. So that's one part of it. The other part of what I've been telling people about is that I've been talking about affordable housing myself, but that it was never an official position that got taken by the Board of Selectmen. I can remember coming back from the first Massachusetts Municipal Association annual convention that I went to and being very excited because I had listened to a presentation by the director of the Falmouth Housing Authority. They were doing a program where they were buying up existing housing and turning it into a town-owned affordable housing. And I thought to myself, this is perfect because you're not changing neighborhoods. You're not putting some new apartment building next to a single-family home. You're just the neighborhood is the same, and you could integrate this throughout the town. And I remember thinking that places at Medfield Gardens would be perfect for this because they're sort of the right size and the right price. And at the time, I remember I got into discussions with Paul Ruda over how much you would pay per unit, and that the ones at Medfield Gardens he thought were selling for too much. His business, he was a selectman here in town at the time, and his business was actually building affordable housing. But the reality was that the Board of Selectmen, as a board, never adopted any plan of that sort. So that was one idea that I had. The other idea that I had was that there's vacant land next to Tilden Village, which is our elderly complex in Medfield, and I kept asking Mike Sullivan, why don't we expand Tilden Village? And I don't know how many units you could put in there, but it's several acres, and so that depending on how high you built it up, you could put a fair number of units in there. And that, ideally, that's what you want to do, is have your affordable housing spread all throughout the town in as small pockets as possible to have the least impact on each neighborhood. But at the time, I was told that the Medfield Housing Authority, as it was then constituted, had no interest in building more housing, that they just wanted to manage the housing that they had at Tilden Village. There is a Medfield Affordable Housing Committee. They had built the property down that's known as Allendale off of Dale Street, and I think that process of building that, from what I've been told, that all happened before I became a selectman, exhausted the committee, and that there wasn't much will to take on more building after that. And so that, I mean, at different times I had different ideas about how to deal with affordable housing. I remember there was a 6-family house on Green Street that I saw advertised in the paper. It was an apartment building at the time, and I think it was for sale for around $500,000. And the minute I saw the ad, I called Mike Sullivan and said, "The town should buy this and turn it into affordable housing. You know, there's another 6 units of affordable housing for us." If you did a number of strategic things like that all around town, you'd eventually get there. I mean, we obviously, with the state hospital, we had figured out that we needed another 256 units. But you know, if you have some here, some there, you get there eventually. Now we've got the fact that we've got the West Street project, and there's really no way to avoid it at the moment. If Gatehouse decides they want to do it, the reality is under 40B that they can effectively do it, and so that. I've been proposing that we need to talk to Gatehouse and see if we can somehow make it a better project for us. It has 1/4 of the units are 3-bedroom units. if we could reduce the number of 3-bedroom units, that would reduce our municipal costs, because the real municipal costs are going to come from the school children. And so that if we can reduce the number of school children, then we can make it more workable for the town, more affordable for the town. And so that I think it makes sense to reach out to Gatehouse. We've reached out to them because of the election coming up. Mike was talking to me just yesterday and today about when to schedule a meeting with Gatehouse, and because there's an election on Monday, I had to tell him, I may not be. Number one, I may not be the selectman next week when you're talking about having these meetings, and number two, even if I am the selectman, typically we change the chair,
right,
and so that it would be Ann Thompson who should go to the meeting instead of me, so that if those meetings go forward, I think Ann will probably go to those, given when they happened. And then there was one other thing. Oh, well, the other thing that I've been pushing for is to have a citizen study committee that would look at the different options with regard to 40B, because there are a whole sort of slew of different possibilities, ranging from you could try to buy the development from Gatehouse. The problem with that is that then every developer in the world will come to Medfield and try to sell you another one, probably, unfortunately. But there are all sorts of different things that you can try, and so that it makes sense. We have a bunch of citizens who are very interested in this process and working on it, and so I have suggested that we harness this energy and try to create a citizen study committee so that we can have these people focus on this issue, come back to the town at the Board of Selectmen level with a series of recommendations as to what the town should be doing, and come up with some sort of plan as to how, in fact, we are going to get to our affordable housing goal, get to our 10%, and try to come up with a affordable housing production plan. The last idea that I had, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago when the selectmen met, and we were talking about this, and all of a sudden it dawned on me during the meeting that one of the things that we could try to do is to actually incorporate Gatehouse. If we can't avoid them at this point, we could perhaps try to incorporate Gatehouse's project into our affordable housing production plan, and that could immunize us for almost 5 years from other 40Bs. You have to be building 0.5% per year to be immunized, and so we have to be building around 20 units a year, and so the 96 units in the Gatehouse project would take care of almost 5 years for us, protect us from other 40Bs.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that idea. I mean, the rail trail that I saw was, I saw a little bit of the one over in Burlington, Bedford area. I think that's called the Minuteman.
Yeah, the Minuteman Trail. Yeah, I've been out there. It's nice.
And I've been on the one on a bike down on the Cape, and I just loved being able to go and ride the bike away from the cars, away from the traffic. And it was just and it's fun to be going through the middle of the woods and to be away from the cars and the traffic and off the street. It's just it's great. I mean, the Bay Colony Rail Trail would connect up to, or could eventually connect up to the Green Line in Newton Highlands. There's a big problem with getting over the new 128 when it's 4 lanes on a side, because they're taking down the bridge, the railroad bridge that's currently there, and so that would be a very expensive way to cross. But still, if you could, even if that bridge wasn't built and you had the rail trail all the way to Newton Highlands, I mean, there's so few crossings between Ice House Road and Newton. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Seven the whole way?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, to think that you could go, I think it's like 7 miles, and so there's maybe like 1 per mile. I've actually stood on the bridge because I got involved in the Bay Colony Rail Trail very early on. A man named Tom Connors from Needham, who's one of the very early proponents of it, called me, and I don't know how he got onto me, but somehow he did. And he called me very early on and asked me if I would get in touch with Mark Boyle, who was the head of real estate for the MBTA, and ask about getting access to the railroad line. And so I called Mark Boyle after Tom, and it was the most fun conversation, because Mark Boyle was just very matter of fact, and they've got this down to a science. They've done it so much that they just give you a 99-year lease for $1 a year, or it's $1 for all 99 years, whatever it is, it's a bargain. And there's a reverter so that if they ever need to use it for an MBTA line again, they can take it back, but the chance of that happening is pretty remote. They'll even let you salvage the rails usually, and that's what really helps to make it work in this case. So that, and my one phone call to Mark Boyle, and all of a sudden I have a 99-year lease if the town of Medfield just signs a letter and asks for it.
Right.
And that afternoon I wrote back to Tom and I said, well, Medfield's lined up their 99-year lease. What's keeping Needham so long?
I guess my question, and this came up tonight, right? Because I asked this question at the meeting, the warrant commission meeting. The paperwork was saying that the warrant article was for construction, right? It was asking for construction, but the one that was read was for more study. Yeah. And where do you fall on that spectrum?
Well, I think that there's still a lot of I's and they need dotting and T's that need crossing. The big issue at the moment is the environmental liability. The T is prohibited from contractually keeping the liability for environmental cleanup, and so that when the town signs up on the lease, it might get the environmental cleanup liability. And so what they're looking at doing is buying insurance to cover that. Now, I've met Mark Boyle since this, because I've been going to a lot of meetings about the Bay Colony Rail Trail. Carol Lisbon, who's the chair of the Dover Board of Selectmen, pulled together a group of people from the 4 towns. Medfield, Dover, Needham, and Newton, and we were meeting just as an ad hoc group to see how we could push this idea forward. And we had Mark Boyle come to one of our 4-town meetings, and he explained that there really is very little liability for the town because, and as I understood it, there were amendments in 2003 to the statute that provided that as long as the town uses best management practices, that it is pretty much exempt from the liability. Now, I have stopped going to those meetings in the past 2 or 3 months. Christian Donner has been heading up the Bay Colony Rail Trail Study Committee in Medfield, and he's got, I think there are 4 or 5 people working with Christian on it. And since they've gotten going, I've stopped going to the meetings, and so that I'm a little bit out of the loop at this point. But my understanding was that there was still perhaps a need for this environmental insurance, and the way that the environmental insurance works is, let's see if I have it right. It's a one-time payment, and I think it runs for 5 years, and it was like $50,000, and the state has a fund that will reimburse you for half the cost of it. And so that for about $25,000, the town could basically be covered for this environmental risk, during which time the rail trail would be built. The ways that because none of the 4 towns have the money to build a rail trail. Rail trails are pretty expensive to build. I think it can be up to $1 million a mile if you're actually contracting it out. The way that we had been looking at it that seemed to be the most feasible was to partner with an outfit called the Iron Horse Preservation Society, who has this model where they will, for free, come in and salvage the iron in the rails, pull up all the ties, and apparently the value of the metal in the rails is enough that it allows them to leave you with a stone dust trail. Or they were talking about something else called T-base, which is some sort of recycled asphalt, and there were different reports as to whether or not that was a satisfactory surface or not. My sense was that if we could get to the point where we had a stone dust trail, that maybe we have a mile and a third or a mile and a half of the trails in Medfield, and I was thinking that over time that maybe the town meeting would be willing to pay for the cost of paving that mile or mile and a third, mile and a half, whatever it is. The highway department has the equipment that they could do it. They are able to pave sidewalks, and so I would imagine that they would be able to pave a trail. And so that was the way that I thought that it made sense to try to approach constructing it, because that would be a low-cost way to do it.
Sure.
The highway garage is the one that is the most egregious and the one that needs attention first, I think. And we just need to figure out the answers. Last year there was a proposal that passed at town meeting, and it didn't pass at the ballot, the written ballot. I was not satisfied personally that all of the questions had been properly answered as to why this building, why this size, why this configuration. And because it was being done in a very fast-tracked way for town meeting last time, my questions never got answered, I know. And so and I was kind of disappointed about that. But I know that I've been to the meetings of the building committee since then, and they're working on reconfiguring the plan is number one, and they're looking at trying to reduce the cost, number two, and their current plan is to try to bring something to a special town meeting in the fall and to try to go forward with that. They have gone forward with the salt shed part of it, and that was another thing that we all knew that we needed to do, so that's happening already.
Okay.
We asked about other capital projects.
Sure.
What the building committee is doing is that they're looking at the area around Dale Street, where the Dale Street School is, where the police and fire station are. They're looking at that as a campus now, a municipal campus, and they're trying to, and Park and Rec is there in the FAF Center. And so what they're doing is looking at the plan for that whole area and how it should be developed. And the thought is that it could almost be some sort of municipal center that would be, in fact, like a second downtown for Medfield, because of the concentration of the municipal buildings there.
Yeah. How are you going to pay for it?
Well, you have to borrow and bond, and the good news is that our debt is down substantially. There was a time when our debt was over 90 million, and I think I don't know specifically how good we are, but I think we're under 45 million at this point, and we have we got 19 million back from the state. When the state switched the way that they were doing school building assistance reimbursements, we actually got a check for around 19 million, and we just have it put in the bank, and it's earning interest at a very poor rate. And unfortunately, we're not allowed to use arbitrage to try to really make money on it. But we use that to pay off the school building loans that we had for the three new school building renovation projects. Mike Sullivan says that in terms of town debt, we're actually in pretty good shape. And so that's great.
Yeah.
So that we have some capacity to borrow. And if we have the capacity to borrow, then we can meet some of these needs that we have. Because the fire and the police station are old. They were built in the late 60s, early 70s, I think, and the fire department can't get all of their equipment out of the weather, and so that we really need to do something there too. They're looking at a combined facility. They really liked the facility that was built in Holden, Massachusetts, and so if anybody wants to see what their public safety building in Medfield might look like in the future, take a look at the one of Holden. I actually know very little about my opponent. I looked at his website, and so I've read what he's written there, and so I know that he runs a tutoring business in town, but I don't know. I have not ever seen him on a town committee. I haven't seen him anywhere around town. I met him last Saturday for the first time when we were holding signs up together at the transfer station. He seems like a very nice person. But the reality is, I don't know anything about him, and I've read his material, and I don't exactly understand why he's running, except that he seems to say that it's time for a change. And I guess my question to that would be a change from what to what, so that I would like some more definition myself personally. I can talk about what I am doing and what I think is important about what I have done. Part of the reason that I became a selectman was that I interacted with the town and the board of selectmen over an issue, and I found it very difficult. I couldn't figure out, even when the town was going to talk about the issue that concerned me at a selectmen's meeting, I had to rely on the selectman's office to call me to tell me that it was when we talked about it. So when I became a selectman, I was very concerned about getting agendas that were available ahead of time so that people could at least see when their issue was coming up. I convinced my colleagues at the time, Paul Ruda and Ann Thompson, that we should close the agenda on Friday afternoons and that we should put it online. In fact, did not get put online very often in those days, but that was supposed to be the way it was supposed to work. And that would give people in town the weekend to see. It would give them several days, 3 or 4 days before the meeting to see what was coming up at the meeting. And the other part of what we really need is to have the minutes online. Now we have a system where the agendas really do get online ahead of time, and the minutes do get online. And the minutes, and actually when the Medfield TV changed out their equipment in this room, I was talking to the camera guy about it, and the minute he told me that there was a hard drive in the box now, the lights just went up in my head, and I said, "Oh, can we put these online now?" And he said, "Oh, sure." And so now you can watch the Selectmen's meetings online, on demand, whenever you want, because Medfield TV loads them up online. So that's one thing that I've done. I've tried to make the information. And I've tried to make the meetings more predictable so that we meet on the first and third Tuesday of the month now. And fortunately, Ann and Mark have continued that over, so that's become a tradition now. I hope that keeps going forward, that's the same thing. One of the things that I was very passionate about was the fact that as a selectman, I learned a lot of information. There's a ton of information in this building, and I was frustrated by the fact that I didn't see it getting out of the building. We maybe talked about it at selectmen's meetings. Not everybody sees the selectmen's meetings. And I was looking for other ways to get it out of the building. I at one point met up with Tom Mulvoy, who used to put out the Globe for 15 years. He worked for them for over 30 years, I think, but he actually was the managing editor of the Globe. And he volunteered at my request to put out an email newsletter for the town so that people could sign up and get an email that would talk about a town issue written by the guy that used to run the Globe. That was not a welcome result in the townhouse, and Mark and Ann voted to not have that happen. And when that got shot down, then I thought to myself, well, I know this information, and so it was at that point that I then started writing about what I knew, and it was sort of one of those situations where I thought, well, there's either time to put up or shut up, and so I started. I created a blog basically at that point, and I learned how to make it work, and so for at least a couple of years now, I think I've been taking the information that I learned and either writing about it or taking documents and uploading them onto a website so that people can read about them. I learned how to feed that through at Twitter so that people can follow me, and it's at Medfield. I've offered that Twitter account to the chief of police if he wants it, because I keep thinking it would be useful for him to have, more useful probably than me to have. And I use Facebook also in a similar way, so that I load the information at WordPress, and it goes out to those 3 entities. And I'm interested because there are actually more people that follow me on Twitter than follow me through the blog itself. So that's another thing that I've done. I pushed to get the Energy Committee started. I just had sort of amorphous concerns about the fact that we were experiencing global warming, and that we should perhaps be doing something about it. I reached out to some people that I knew were knowledgeable, and I sat around this very corner of this table a couple of years ago with Marie, Zach Nolan, and Cynthia Green, and Raina Rubin, and Cynthia Green works for the EPA, is so knowledgeable and is so organized that she just took my amorphous concerns and said, here's what you should be doing, and the issue was you should be reducing your energy usage. The town should be saving money, which is great for the town, and in fact it reduces global warming, it reduces your carbon footprint. Since that committee started, the town energy consumption is down 31.7% in that time frame. I was concerned about the number of Lyme disease cases I was seeing in Medfield, and so that I was at a Medfield Foundation meeting a couple summers ago in June, and we spent half the meeting talking about the number of Lyme disease cases in town, and the little boy across the street from me was in a children's hospital at the time, and I said, we need to be doing something about this. This is a public health hazard, and so I pushed to get the Lyme disease committee started. And we now have this very successful Lyme disease committee that the state wildlife biologists called a paradigm for local action in the state. So we copied what Dover had done, but somehow we became the model instead of Dover, according to this biologist, for what the state should be doing. So there's another instance where things are actually working. I got in very early on, as I said, about the Bay Colony Rail Trail, and I've been just thrilled to see that go forward. And Christian is just, he's meticulously thorough in getting that going. I don't know, it's a series of seeing the problems, trying to gather the information about what the problem is, and then solving the problem in an open and transparent way, and bringing the residents in to be part of the discussion and the solution. But I've tried to do that in a number of different areas.